39. Dr. Kanzu's report made reference to information obtained from the defendant's de facto partner that the defendant had, quote, become increasingly preoccupied with online conspiracy theories, withdrawing from his family, and becoming more grandiose and unable to be challenged, end quote. And when he was challenged, he, open quote, would become verbally but not physically aggressive, end quote. The de facto partner also outlines certain behaviours on the part of the defendant that Dr. Kanzu thought may be features consistent with a narcissistic personality disorder. So the Dr. Kanzu's got some report from the police where the police have gone and interviewed the missus and written some things about the missus's interaction with the police in a report, which then ends up on Dr. Kanzu's counter, where he can then assume that this is part of this and make reference to that in his report. So the reference is demonstrating the links of the information pool being pulled together, demonstrating that orchestrated or structured report or series of events that would demonstrate this prosecution's want to fabricate a story to get an end result. 38. A more detailed report of Dr. Kanzu, Registrar in Forensic Psychiatry, dated 19 October 2020, was prepared for a later hearing at the MHRT. This included detail that the defendant, despite denying he had any admission to psychiatric hospital or having ever been prescribed psychiatric medications before, had been admitted to Waratah House in September 2015 following an overdose, although at that point there was, it seems from the discharge summary, no sign of a mood disorder or psychiatric disorder at the time. So we can see that the police have participated by providing evidence to Dr. Kanzu's report, and now the justice is detailing Dr. Kanzu by name and title and the date that these reports were made, and demonstrating that he's dug even further in an attempt to smear the defendant by digging into a past which would have been, again, 5 years previous to the current day events. In general, you can see these doctors, corrective services, and the police working hand in hand to provide documentation to each other and formulate a response that is a structured response that's wanted, rather than the just response that should be found at the end anyway. As we move further up, we get another excerpt from this doctor's notes, wherein she makes a note about the act of supremacy and not having heard of it before, whether she had or not, the leading him on to keep answering questions where the answers are being given and she still has a denial in her own head, the doctor, Dr. Keating, as to the reality of those answers being factual and now being backed up by the court in the comments relating to a curial side to all of this law. 37. Documents from the MHRT in early September 2020 noted the grandiose delusions against a background of systematized paranoid delusions. The MHRT agreed with the need for enforced treatment. This starts very soon after the attack on his ideals to raise a flag in honour of the Anzac. This starts with New South Wales Fixated Persons Unit becoming fixated themselves on the idea that a people that recognise who they are in international law are somewhat a threat to the state. And the judge has already hinted at a class division that is occurring here at which the police officer himself doesn't realise he is party to as well. The idea of mandating an officer to keep his job position kind of fits in with the whole aspect of this case, full stop. When we bring up international humanitarian law Rule 92 and put a curial standing on the table, we begin to see something else. 36. Returning to the September 2020 report for the MHRT, the registrar recorded that the defendant did not have a history of mental illness prior to custody, but that he had a, quote, systematized paranoid delusion that there was unlawful military occupation of Australia, end quote, and that there are, open quote, two constitutions of Australia, close quote. And due to these beliefs, he believes that the police officers should be, open quote, hung for war crimes, close quote. He also has had, open quote, grandiose delusions that he is the mayor of Campbelltown and had been putting flags up around the suburb, end quote. He described the defendant as being, open quote, very guarded, closed quote, about the psychotic beliefs, and that he refused to engage with the treating team. He apparently had repeatedly told nurses he was, open quote, going to be released within days, close quote, and, open quote, has friends in very high places, close quote. The registrar concluded that he was insightless into his persecutory delusions and was a high risk of harm to others if his beliefs are challenged. At that time, he continued to refuse psychiatric medication. The registrar concluded that the risk to others was due to his untreated mental illness, and so he was transferred to Long Bay Hospital for involuntary treatment. Now, I went through a similar scenario wherein this forensic mental health team continued to pester, but at every turn I gave no consent for any interaction with this team at all. They seem to have forced upon... The treatment was very similar, but in one regard I ended up inside a general population wherein a number of things happened that need to be discussed later. This is an ongoing problem that New South Wales Corrections Facilities and the New South Wales Police and the New South Wales Government have had issue with for a very long time. This is not something that's new. This is not something that's independent. This is something that has happened before, will happen again, unless something is said about it. So going backwards, we can see these links from doctor to doctor back to this September 2020 decision, which would have been made in Silverwater Corrections Facility to have him transported to a hospital. And this Dr. Keating would have been the responsible party here, along with this registrar, Dr. Kanzu, a registrar in forensic psychiatry, dated 19 October. So he would have been transferred out of the care of Dr. Keating at Silverwater and into the care of Dr. Kanzu when reaching Long Bay Correctional Facility, which is a hospital facility rather than a jailhouse facility.